Hello, I'm Jenny Klochko and you're watching my podcast. It's a platform where we discussing very complicated matters beyond your daily newsfeed. Today I'm meeting via Zoom Edward Lucas, legendary journalist, writer, author of many books, and politician, senior advisor, Center for European Policy Analysis. Assassination attempt of Trump on Saturday, which happened during election rally, and Russia has already started attempts pushing its narrative, describing what is called the suicide of democracy and predicting civil war and dissolution of US. What's your take on that?
Russia and other hostile states will always try and make the most of any problem in a democracy. They want to portray democracy as a failure. They will say that the leaders are idiots, that the system is crooked, that everything is going wrong. And the aim is to sow mistrust and fear and confusion in the minds of Western voters, because this makes it easier for them to do what they want, which is to expand their sphere of influence and to make money. So an attempted assassination is just perfect for Russia. Of course, it makes no sense to apply a conspiracy theory to this. If it was a real conspiracy, the assassination would succeed. But this isn't about logic. It's not about portraying some alternative system of government as better. It's just about making people feel scared and confused.
About NATO summit in DC is finished, and there were a lot of claims and promises to help more Ukraine, but Ukraine hasn't got the invitation to join NATO. What are your thoughts on it? You think its White House is not ready, or it's a bit tricky to invite Ukraine? How would you understand the situation?
Well, I think the NATO summit actually is a catastrophic failure, just as the whole of Western policy since the full-scale invasion has been a catastrophic failure, and indeed Western policy since 2014 and the first attack has been a failure. We do not understand the existential struggle that we all face against imperialist Russia. We do not understand how vital it is that Ukraine does not just survive, but must win, and Russia must lose. And the longer we delay with these half measures, the greater the danger. So I'm extremely disappointed in NATO. I'm particularly disappointed in the United States, and I think that the dithering of the Biden administration means that Western support for Ukraine is always too little, too late, whether it's in terms of the weapon systems that are being sent or the financial support or the security guarantees. So I would like to see Ukraine in NATO really quickly, and I want to see Russia defeated really badly. And I want to see reconstruction start using the confiscated assets from Russia, with Russia paying for the damage that it's done.
Hungarian Prime Minister was visiting Russia, was visiting Ukraine, went to China, and as he claims, he's looking for peace. And every time when people try to explain him what is Russia doing in Ukraine and there's no time for peace, he refers to the past when Hungary was occupied by Russia, like they know better what it means to live under Russia. How would you explain these attempts to do what? We know that he is very anti-Ukraine and very pro-Putin. What he's trying
I think actually Viktor Orban is really pro-Orban. I'm not sure he's pro-China. I'm not sure he's pro-Russia. He's just and I'm not even sure he's pro-Hungary, really. He's pro-Orban and pro-Fidesz Inc., Fidesz being the name of his political party. So I think this is all about getting concessions from other countries, about trying to negotiate business deals. And I think that this sort of performative anti-Westernism is actually quite shallow. And when the history shows that when the United States puts a lot of pressure on Hungary, Hungary buckles. And we saw this with the Kremlin International Development Bank, the so-called spy bank that was put in Budapest, and the United States really complained about this, and Orban quite meekly got rid of it, and he also quite meekly goes along with sanctions in the end. So I don't like him. I wish that Hungary had a better leader, but I think it's important not to see this as part of some kind of great axis of Russian or Chinese power. It's Orban being Orban.
In the UK finished election, I was very touched by your video promo when you're referring to London, how you want to save London. I hope next time it will be victorious for you, because it was something when you were mentioning about saving London from playboys, from billionaires, from actually give this quintessentially British breath to London rather than money laundering for different states. Election is over, and what's going to happen now with UK and Russia relationship? In one of your books, you wrote that it changed after the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko, and Russia was using its money to influence on British foreign affairs. What would you expect now, and how it's gonna also has impact on war in Ukraine?
I'm absolutely delighted that the Conservatives lost this election. I think that particularly under Boris Johnson, but also under other Conservative leaders before him era in British politics, and that the Conservatives lost the election. It was the thing that got me into politics, was the sight of our intelligence committee in Parliament trying and failing to publish a report on Russian influence in Britain because Boris Johnson found it politically embarrassing. I have high hopes that in the new Labour government, there are some people who take money laundering very seriously and have excellent credentials on Russia and on other issues. So I'm hopeful that I'll be able to work with the new government on this. And this should really be a cross-party issue. There are people in all parties who are worried about dirty money and the integrity of our political system. And I feel that Britain is slowly educating itself on this issue, although it is very late. And I don't at the moment feel we have the right level of contrition for the enormous amount of money we've laundered from very bad people in other countries and the terrible damage that's been done as a result. And I would mention here not just Russia, but also Ukraine. We were the destination of choice for Ukrainian oligarchs who were trying to launder the money that they were stealing from the Ukrainian people. And that has played a role in weakening Ukraine in the years since independence. And it's something where Britain is directly responsible.
Is there, how about Russian military aggression against Britain? How likely does it seem in the current global landscape?
Well, if we'd been having this conversation 20 years ago, and I told you that Russia would use a radioactive weapon in the streets of London, that it would use a nerve agent in Salisbury, that it would blow up factories in the east of London, that it would assassinate a whistleblower in a money laundering case, and I could continue with other things that Russia's done in this country, you would have said, no, they would never dare to do that. And actually, they do that. So we are already under attack, a major cyber attack as well on our NHS and Russian gangsters. So there's a lot going on. And I don't feel that our deterrent is anywhere near as strong as it needs to be. When Russia does these things, we complain, we send press releases, we expel some diplomats. But we, like other Western countries, are struggling to find an answer to these so-called hybrid attacks, and I expect them to continue.
How powerful Russian propaganda in the UK, and what kind of narratives are you annoyed the most? And how do you think we can resist it? Because it's so easy to scare British people with a nuclear blackmail by Putin and other things. Obviously, people don't have to have the war, but what we can do against this propaganda?
Well, I'm not sure that British people are easily scared, and I think that there's probably less room for Russian propaganda in Britain. Russian propaganda is much more effective in countries like Germany, where they seem able to spook German voters with fears about war and with other sorts of scare stories and rumour mongering. I think that the effectiveness of Russian propaganda in Britain probably peaked a few years ago, and since then it's, I think, on the way down. We don't see much in the way of the RT, because that's been kicked off our cable channels, and the considerable difficulty you can watch RT through intermediaries, but that's pretty minor pursuit. And I don't see strong pro-Russian voices in politics anymore. So I think that the war in Ukraine has had the effect of educating the British public considerably about the danger we face in Russia. It doesn't mean the Brits are ready to do what they need to do, but they aren't at least easily fooled in the way that they might have been 10 or 15 years ago.
During your campaign, you emphasized on the importance of the UK's security and defence. For example, General Sheriff in this podcast insisted the UK needs to increase its defence expenditures. What are the main steps needs to keep this country safe?
Well, my friend Richard Sheriff is absolutely right. We are in a very bad state with our military. It's no comfort that other European countries are in a worse state, because we like to think we have one of the best armed forces in the world, and I'm afraid we don't. So I think the first thing is to make a very clear-eyed assessment of what the threats are and what we need to do to deal with them, and then spend our money accordingly and spend our money efficiently. So I'm deeply sceptical of the value of the 2 aircraft carriers, for example, which are turning into white elephants for the Royal Navy. We need to remedy our manpower crisis. We are very short of men and indeed women to serve in uniform, with the result that our planes don't have pilots, our ships can't go to sea. The army is under strength. Military accommodation for all 3 services is very poor. And we don't have stockpiles, so we can only fight a war for a few weeks if one comes. And of course, that is very bad for our deterrence. So I think we probably do need to spend more, and quite likely quite a lot more. But the first thing to do is to stop wasting the money that we have, and to spend it on things that will actually contribute directly to our security, rather than furthering the geopolitical ambitions of past governments, which I think is the case of the aircraft carriers, or indeed disguised industrial policy, which was the reason behind the contract to have them built in the first place.
Ukraine. Ukraine has the perception before the full-scale invasion as something similar to Russia. And since the full-scale invasion, how the profile of Ukraine changed, changed its identity in the eyes of and minds of Western intellectuals?
I think it's always a good idea not to obsess too much about how your image is in the eyes of other people. You don't, I think, get Americans or Germans or French people worrying about what the rest of the world think of us. They just get on with it. But I think it's clear that the Ukraine has been put on the map by the full-scale invasion, and we have many people met their first Ukrainians through outreach to refugees and things like that. We have a whole range of civil society efforts also delivering military and medical and other supplies to Ukraine. So I think that Ukraine is now in our minds and in our hearts in a way that it wasn't 10 years ago. So that's good. I think in the sort of elite discourse, there's still a lot of worry about Ukrainian decision-making, about corruption, about the long-term effects of the trauma that Ukraine has suffered. What will peacetime Ukraine be like? So we've got plenty to think about at that level. And I think that the thing that perhaps hasn't quite got through yet is actually Ukraine is fighting for our freedom as well as its own. And this is the most important point. We have an existential fight going on with Russia. We can either win it with Ukraine on our side, or we can wait until Ukraine is beaten and then try and win it anyway. And it'll be much more difficult to wait. So let's do it now.
Ukraine needs a lot of support from the Western allies. And there are a lot of claims to help Ukraine from politicians, but it's not always ending up with actions in actual help. So there are a lot of frustration behind closed doors. My question is, how do you think is Ukraine well communicate its needs, and it helps to rely the common people around the world to understand the need and help and necessity to assist this country against Russian aggression?
Well, I think Ukraine has done a fantastic job in telling its story, but it needs to do it a lot better. And I feel that the Ukrainian diaspora, Ukrainian businesses, Ukrainian churches and civil society institutions, and Ukrainian embassies and consulates need to raise their game considerably to get across this message, not just in Britain, but perhaps even more so in the countries of the so-called global south, outside Europe, North America, the sort of traditional allies. And I think I understand why this happens, but I lament it, that the sort of typical Ukrainian information evening involves the same people we always see sitting in the same room with the people they always see when they're talking about that subject, and the discussion goes on very familiar lines, and then everyone goes home feeling that they've done their bit for Ukraine. But actually, you need to get the message across to people who don't know about Ukraine. And I think we need to get better at social media, better at outdoor advertising, better at fundraising, better at all sorts of aspects of this, because the sort of adrenaline-fueled amateurism of the beginning of the war has now run its course, and Western attention spans are quite short. People get bored. Their attention moves on to other things, and Ukraine must keep world attention in order to survive. So I'm afraid I have a rather bracing message on that.
Zelenskyy leadership, I think at the beginning of his presidency, he was like a breath of fresh air. He was an experienced politician with his charisma, and world leaders were charmed. However, with time, this perception has changed, and sometimes President Zelenskyy struggles to hide his frustration with politicians. What's your take on Ukraine's president?
Well, I think that running a country in wartime is very difficult, and I'm not sure that anything I say would be particularly useful on this front. I remember during I don't remember because I wasn't alive at the time, but during the Second World War, there was great dissatisfaction with Churchill. He made a number of very bad decisions. At least one point, he faced a no confidence vote in the House of Commons. And when he won in the end, the British people couldn't wait to boot him out of office and elect somebody else instead. So it's not an easy business being a wartime leader. And I think that Zelenskyy looks physically exhausted. And I think that Ukrainians will work this out themselves. But there's certainly plenty to worry about.
Do you know, some people refer to Zelenskyy as a modern Churchill, and especially referring to this film, The Darkest Hour, for Churchill, how it was when Britain joined World War II. Would you agree on that?
I don't think direct historical comparisons are very useful, and I would caution against using the highly fictionalized account of Churchill's leadership in The Finest Hour as anything other than a historical romance. It's not an accurate depiction. My great uncle was one of Churchill's key aides during the war and spent his all those years in the bunker underneath Downing Street. He was the chief of the air staff. And so I have strong family connections to this era. I think that it was true that at the beginning of this, that we really felt that President Zelenskyy was the leader of the free world, and he was articulating values that are often forgotten in the West and articulating them very well. And he was personally, physically very brave and very eloquent. But Ukraine needs to do better. And I think that I would like to see a broader range of leaders going to the West. I think it'd be good if President Zelenskyy would give some press conferences to Ukrainian journalists. This is going to be a long war. This is not going to be win or lose within months or win or lose this year. I'm afraid we've got this going on for some time, and we need to get ready for this and make sure that we preserve democracy and the rule of law and political freedoms within Ukraine in conditions of wartime, and also make sure that Ukraine tells its message abroad as effectively as possible.
Putin, you wrote about him a lot in your books, and last year when you discussed in media the coup in Russia initiated by Prigozhin, you mentioned about weakened Putin. What are your thoughts on the Russian president, and is he a mad monster or determined to win at any cost? Does he seem strong or weak for you today?
Well, I was quite wrong about Putin. I mean, I thought that the Prigozhin mutiny was a signal that Putin's power was weakening very severely and possibly even catastrophically. And I was thinking at that time that Putin would be lucky to last the summer, and I was quite wrong on that. I think that in fact, Putin's done quite a good job in recovering the sort of stability of his regime and his personal prestige. It's a great mistake to think that Putin is mad. It's also a great mistake to think that Putin is the problem. Putin is a symptom of the way in which the Soviet Union collapsed, with this imperial resentments, the institutional continuity of the KGB, and the astonishingly lucrative opportunities that were presented for corrupt officials and for organized crime. And Putin is a sort of fusion of that, the KGB, Russian imperialist sentiment, Russian Orthodox Church, organized crime, corrupt officialdom, and so on. And so he's a useful expression, way of seeing the problem. But if it wasn't Putin, it would be someone else. And I very strongly advise people not to think that if Putin goes, our problems will be over. Whoever comes after Putin will certainly be quite bad and possibly even worse. And actually, what came before Putin wasn't that great either, if you want to ask the Chechens for their opinion.
So what Russians should prepare themselves for with such situation in their country? I mean, those who haven't left the country.
Well, I think the long-term future for Russia is quite bleak, really. And I think that the countries only really normalize after they've lost their last imperial war, assuming that they've had an empire. And this has been important for France after Algeria. It was important for Germany after the Second World War. It was important for Britain. And I think that Russia has yet to sort of de-imperialize itself, and if that's a word, or to its internal decolonization has a long way to go. And until that happens, it's going to be difficult for Russia to be any kind of normal country with a state that serves its citizens and rules that apply to everybody. So I think there's plenty of upheaval ahead for Russia. If I had to guess, and it would just be a guess, I think we are overdue for another period of what Russians call smuta, a time of troubles. And it's interesting, if you talk to people in countries next to Russia, they think that's quite likely, and they think they'll deal with it. If you talk to countries further away from Russia, they think this is unlikely, but also horrifying, and will do anything they can to avoid it. And this will be, I think, a big tension in Europe and in the West generally in the years to come.
You wrote a book on cybersecurity. The main fear of people in circumstances of war with Russia is the nuclear bomb, not the stolen identity or cyber attacks. Do we underestimate the damage there can be done in case of the poor cybersecurity, and how bad can be damage in cyber attacks for the people in the UK?
Well, there's no such thing as a cyber attack. There are lots of different kinds of threats to the confidentiality of data, which is where we particularly worry about the Chinese Communist Party stealing vast amounts of data in order to understand our societies very well and to exert pressure on them. There's threats to the integrity of data, and there's threats to the availability of data. And different cyber attacks will concentrate on different aspects of that. I think this country, in Britain, has improved its cybersecurity in terms of resilience a bit when it comes to the integrity and availability of data. So I no longer worry the way that I used to, that the railway system or the power grid or the financial system could just be closed down. It's a simple attack on a single highly vulnerable database. But it's still, unfortunately, the case that our health system is vulnerable, and we've seen that big time. Local government is vulnerable. It's not as well protected as central government. So there's plenty of room for disruption. But actually, my biggest worry is not these sort of sabotage attacks, but the fact that the Chinese Communist Party in Britain and in many other countries is just stealing vast amounts of data when they then use artificial intelligence to look for patterns and anomalies and connections in that data, with the result that they probably in fact, they certainly understand our societies better than we do ourselves. And that gives them a tremendous amount of power. And if they choose to share those conclusions with Russia, then that gives Russia a big advantage as well.
You mentioned several times the fact that you were arrested, beaten up, and interrogated. When has it happened? Could you tell the story?
Well, there's so many stories, and they're all a long time ago. But I was arrested once in communist Yugoslavia by the UDBA. I was arrested most recently, I think, in Azerbaijan during a completely innocent trip to just look at the border of Nakhichevan and Turkey, and the rather overzealous Azeri police thought that was they wanted to know what a foreigner was doing there on that border, and that was just sort of inconvenient rather than frightening. But I think probably the biggest thing was when I entered the Soviet Union, or entered occupied Lithuania rather, without a Soviet visa. And I was able to trip my way in, and was then given a visa number 0001 by the Lithuanians. And this displeased the Soviets very much. And when they were very keen that I should leave Lithuania, and I ended up in Belarus, where I was arrested and questioned, and then deported from Grodno on a train to Poland, and was told that I was banned from the Soviet Union for life. But actually, the Soviet Union didn't live much longer after that, so it wasn't a very severe sanction.
Edward, you're no young man, but how far are you ready to go to protect democratic values now? I mean, taking in consideration that you have experience with this physical attack on you, and
I think the good thing about being quite old is that you become a lot less scared of things, and I've had an extremely enjoyable, interesting, exciting, sometimes uncomfortable life. I've covered four revolutions and 2 wars, and I lived under dictatorship, so I'm quite used to. I don't enjoy discomfort perhaps the way that I used to, but I can put up with quite a lot. And but I also think that it's important not for people to make way for younger journalists. And I'm delighted to see such brilliant young war correspondents covering the war in Ukraine. And I think there'll be something slightly sad about an guy in his 60s with a bad leg and slightly deaf, limping around the front line, getting in everyone's way when you need youngsters who can run fast. So I'm happy to move gracefully aside and let younger and better journalists do the jobs that I used to do.
yeah, but you become the legend. You know, it's so many years you with The Economist, now your books. So Edward Lucas became the big brand and doesn't need, as a journalist, to be attached to any corporation or any media. You media yourself. You're politician, and now people hope for your protection. You know, your election campaign. I think
Well,
people.
I was sad not to get elected, but I'm delighted that so many other excellent candidates from the Lib Dems and from elsewhere have been elected. And it's very important that in a democracy that you are ready to lose as well as ready to win. But I think that I'm very happy that I have my column in the Times, and the advantage of having seen a lot is sometimes you can make sense of things in a way that someone less experienced can't. So I'm happy to draw on my slightly faded memories of the last 40-something years and try and make sense of current events. I'm also delighted to have a role at the CEPA think tank in Washington, where I'm an advisor, and I write a column there every week in English for them, which goes out in half a dozen or so languages in the region, including in Ukrainian for Tijden. And so I'm extremely grateful for my nice life, and I have no complaints. I wish from the bottom of my heart that I'd been completely wrong. I would be so happy if my extreme skepticism about Russia in the 1990s had proved to be completely unfounded. I'd be delighted if Putin had turned out to be wonderful, and if Russia was at peace with its neighbors and prosperous and free, and if the Chinese Communist Party was busy liberalizing and giving its people freedoms, and if both regimes were apologizing for their crimes in the past, and everyone would think Edward Lucas was a complete lunatic and paranoid and wrong about everything. And I would be absolutely delighted if that was the case. It's actually rather sad to be proved so comprehensively right.
Are you planning to take part in the next election
No,
for the parliament?
I was happy to do it once, and I'm continue to be an enthusiastic and loyal member of the Liberal Democrats. But I think that pounding the pavements, the sort of bootstrapping your way to victory is something that's best done by someone who's a bit younger than me. I'm 62, and my knees are still hurting from the last campaign. I have no desire to start a new one.
Yeah, but those videos were very charming. I watched them and I was really touched, especially, when I was watching them, it actually gave me inspiration to do the episode on London for this podcast with you. Because only a person like you can, have this tender and love for the city to open up for people around the world who would like to touch it. And
Well, I'm glad, and I think it's important in a campaign. You're not just trying to win the election; you're trying to get things done. And we had many small campaigns in the big campaign to redress injustices and to expose wrongdoing, and they all worked. It's also important to make friends and have fun, and politics is part of life, and you should enjoy life. And my team and I enjoyed ourselves tremendously, and we made new friends and learnt new things. So that's important. And there's also the creative side, and it was if the campaign videos we made perhaps didn't get as many votes as we wanted, but they did make a lot of people laugh. And the one of my dogs seems to have been particularly popular, so my dog is delighted about that too.
Yeah, I was very touched by them while I was preparing for our conversation. Edward, thank you very, very much for your time, for your patience, and for the honor talking to you, because for me, you are one of those inspiring legends in the journalism. And
Well,
I
thank
hope
you.
to
Thank
read
you.
more of your books.
Well, it's very nice. I can see two of my books, I think, are on the bookshelf behind you. You just got one, yes.
Yes,
Um,
and where's my cyber security?
Cyberphobia is there somewhere as
Yeah. It's
well. Well, Jenny, thank you for your.
Thank you very much.
Do you prefer being called Jenny or Yevgenia, which is better?
Well, I prefer to be called Zhenya, but
Jenny.
yeah, but English speakers they struggling to pronounce it. You sound perfect, but pronounce and to spell it. So I had few unfortunate events. After that, I decided to establish Jenny to make easier for everyone. So I would know that this is me called, and for people here where I live wouldn't be a struggle.
Well, I was very pleased when I first went behind the Iron Curtain to Czechoslovakia to find that my name, Edward, could have so many diminutives. And it's one of the great joys of Slavic languages is that you can have so many wonderful, not just from Edward to Edichek was one favorite, Edunka.
Yeah,
So I think
check.
I would rejoice in the fact. I mean, Jenny is an example of a British diminutive from Jennifer, but of course in Russian it goes much further, and you could become Jennykins or something like that. So anyway, it was a pleasure talking to you, and
Thank you.
thank you for your excellent questions.
Thank you very much. Have a lovely day. Thank you for watching. I'm Jenny Klochko, and today I spoke to Edward Lucas, legendary journalist, author, politician. Please read his books, you will enjoy if you're interested in the subject. And thank you everyone for your like, for your shares, for the comment. I read all of them. Sometimes I try to reply. Thank you very, very much. And if you like today's conversation, please let me know in the comments and share on your social media. Thank you very much.